But actually, in this case, there were cells, there were smells that the cells emitted that enabled it to be collective and each to follow each other's on. And that's been a very interesting analogy with which Philip Johnson, same name as the architect, actually began to make an analogy in the way in which we could begin to understand the informal city, the way in which organizations work. Flexible, creative, in response to need, and in response to circumstances. In the language of emergence, it's better to build a densely interconnected system with simple elements and let the more sophisticated behavior and organization trickle up. The I to the we. As I always say, when the we can become inclusive of them, then we really are into development, which is fantastic. But we also know that cities, societies, human societies, need design structures. Physical, spatial, legal, institutional, and so on. These design structures have rules, rituals, standards, routines, which provide society with its continuity. It provides that shared context of meaning that makes us what we are. Right? This is, in here, a community of practice, in a sense. And it is to these structures, to these design structures, as Isaiah Berlin said many years ago, that we give up some of our individual liberties in order to protect the rest. The question then becomes, how much structure do you design? How much individual liberty are you prepared to give up? Yeah? Knowing that not enough structure is unhelpful, it's chaotic, it becomes anarchic, even dangerous, and yet too much structure becomes prescriptive, top-down, and serves the interests of whoever, but not certainly not at the community level. And when there is too much structure, an interesting thing happens, particularly in planning, particularly in our architectural work. Compliance to those structures begins to take over to the discretion that is important for emergent structures to survive within that bigger structure. Systems, in other words, become self-serving. You've all heard the expression that goes, universities would be great if anybody could get rid of the students. No, they're wonderful without the students. The example I'm going to give you now, I was wondering whether I should. There was a study done in the United Kingdom some time ago. There was a very funny characteristic. The buses never stopped at bus stops. And even now, when I'm in Oxford, I have to stand in the road and wave the bus down, which is supposed to stop at the bus stop. So the public were in an outcry and said, well, what's going on here? So the Confederation of British Industries did a survey amongst bus drivers to find out what on earth was going on. And the resounding conclusion from the bus drivers was, how can you stick to timetables if you have to keep stopping the passengers? And you go, well, the system's become self-serving. What's the point of the bus? We've lost purpose here and so on. And I think we need to watch that in all cases. How many planning systems that are in place, insofar as the legal and legislative process, are self-serving in the context of ensuring ease of planning or ease of administration or ease of management or ease of financing. Right? Recognizing that actually that ease denies the complexity, which is the richness of life and the richness of place. The third assumption is about the nature of our own interventions as practitioners, as professionals. And I would argue whoever you are, whether you're architects, you're planners, engineers, and I consider you all, if you're engaged in this business, whatever your discipline background, I tend to call you all development practitioners, right? With an architectural focus to you, of course. So the question is, what is the nature of our intervention, and importantly, our assumed roles and responsibilities in the context of these big issues I'm talking about in a development setting? And I've come to the conclusion that there are 4 overlapping responsibilities, which I think give you the basis to evaluate yourselves, your roles, and your programs and projects as you go along. Right? You've already got one set of evaluations, which is how to make your practice strategic, what changes are occurring, and so on. Here I'm talking about your own professional conduct. And I call it my PEAS principles, P-E-A-S. Kind of a nice green type thing, but it's nothing actually about the greening of the environment. In my book, I wrote a book some time ago called Housing Without Houses, in which I argued that in order to solve the housing problem, you should stop building houses. I won't get into that. But I argue specifically that in order to do that, governments, professionals, and so on should stop providing, as in giving, and instead enable people to provide for themselves. And I've since suggested that, because in order to be a good enabler, you have to be a prudent provider. there's always stuff you have to provide. Now, it may not be a house if it's a housing program. It may be land, it may be microfinance, it may be training, it may be skills, it may be recycling, whatever it might be. There's always stuff you have to provide. So the first of that is P, providing. Now that's what we're very good at. The trouble here is that if we just do that, you want a house? Oh, we got a house, that's no problem. I can design a house in 2 days. Housing project, that might take 4 days. No problem, I'll pull it out of the drawer. Yeah? Providing on its own locks you back into either a top-down system or turns your work into charity. Right? I have no problem with charity, but the charitable gesture is not sustainable, right, by anyone. Okay, we're not talking about life-saving situations here at all. Worse still, the charitable gesture makes us feel very good about ourselves in the context very often providing something that's totally inappropriate. And I can give you some wonderful post-tsunami responses that do just that. They are mostly in the service of the provider, not for those who have been provided for. In fact, those who have been provided for have been entirely disabled, which is my next set of responsibilities, not disabled, but E. E, enablement. The question then is, how do I provide what I provide in order to enable communities, people, households and so on, not just to provide for themselves, but to be able to sustain what we provided over the long term. Yeah? So, what does it take to enable? And there are categories of enablement that we can talk about. There's community enablement, very often talked about, which is about capacities, about opening, widening choice, being inclusive in terms of differences in value basis and so on in community. Political enablement, which is about removing discrimination, about standards, about the legislation that we build into our programs and so on. Market enablement, which is about partnerships, it's about social enterprises, all that sort of stuff. And then there's important design enablement. What does, for you guys out there, what does design mean if it is not just a process of producing a building, but it's actually a process of cultivating choice that induces, that enables people to decide their own basis. Very physical, I can show you by the time projects that I've done in which there is a design structure that at the same time enables the emergent ones to survive and flourish and even transform the structure I design over time. Right? How do we enable that process? The A of P's is all about adapt or change. Right? I don't know how you're taught, but I was taught that once you've designed the house is finished. Now, there's a lovely Egyptian quote in Arabic, which I know just a little still, and it's not easy to translate, but it basically says, when the house is finished, the family dies. There's no such thing as a finished house. It's constantly transforming in values, in need, in status, in dignity, and all the rest of it. Right? What do we provide in order to enable the house to adapt? So now we're adding another layer here, to change. Change is absolutely significant. My old colleague Colin Ward gave us a hint of what we need to look at if change has become an integral part of our process and not something we try and resist. Because after all, once I've designed what I've designed, I do not want anybody to fiddle with it. Right? So is that my direction? Designing a hospital, that's probably true. The kinds of environments we're talking about, that is regressive. Just look at the incredible variability of what you've got out there, what people would call vernacular, both traditional and improvised. Look at what happens out there. There's an urban anthropologist called Richard Sennett who works in London, and he would say that improvisation, the ability to improvise, is the user's art. That is what they're so fantastic at. Right? Why do we deny that? Why do we professionalize that? The second part of enabling adaptation or change is an environment which is convivial, and convivial in Ivan Illich's terms, which is where he says people are able to stamp their own identity on place rather than allow designers to determine the meanings and expectations of others. If you do that, he says, stamp your identity on the identity of others, it relegates people to the subservient role of caretakers of what we provided. Just think about that. How much, you know, these guys are terrible, this community. They don't look after what we've given them. They're not grateful. Incredible divisions and start up that way. So, look at the concept of conviviality in that particular sense. And the third important concept, that comes from education, which is the concept of loose fit. We're very good at tight fit. Everything is controlled. Everything is organized, right? The concept of loose fit, in fact, was developed by a guy called Simon Nicholson when he was looking at children's play, children's education. He was looking particularly at playgrounds and how most playgrounds provided through institutional means were made out of concrete this and fixed slides and so on. And he would say, well, that's fun, but how do you make fun, as it were, creative and educational? What would it take to make a playground made up not of fixed parts, but of loose parts, both agriculturally, in terms of the way in which you plant things, and even things that they could make, slides that could adapt, water that could be used, and there's some very good examples, by the way, of that now. Right? So, his statement goes, in any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibilities for discovery are directly proportional to the number and kind of variables within it. What are we providing in order to enable the place to adapt? What kind of variables exist? How are we controlling them? How do we invite change rather than try and resist it? All right. The final part of P's is the S word, and that is how do we keep it all going? Sustainability. Classic case. Tell another little joke, which one of you have seen my email, my YouTube thing, have heard. I love to collect street signs when I'm working around informal settlements. They tell something about the aspirations of the place, as well as what's going on about the place. Right? Head shine and shoe shine. We work at both ends. A wonderful thing. A hairdresser that also shines for shoes. Fantastic. Creative. Barber shop, we also sell bicycle parts. Why not? Don't have a haircut and buy your bicycle parts. But the great one was the sustainable barber shop. Now we have to stop. I have to talk to this guy. What the hell's going on here? Right? So we went in, said, okay, I love this. This has happened to me in South Africa, doesn't it? What is a sustainable barber shop? And he thought for a minute. Because he'd never been asked that before. He's just seen the word all over the place. He was suddenly confronted by us. And he said, well, I tell you what a sustainable barber shop is. When my customers come in, I cut just enough hair so they're satisfied, but not too much, so they come back sooner rather than later. That way I keep my business going. Right? So this guy was not trying to solve the world. He had no ideology. He was just concerned about his business. Right? So great for the world savers and the lifesavers. You know, that's fine. We'll all hug each other and hold hands and try and save the world. But how do we translate that, as it were, locally to communities? What does it mean? What does that big word mean? And we fear abstracting it when we start doing it in all sorts of ways. Now my point is that if we're providing catalysts, if we're enabling people to take their own control, if we're building into place the capacity for change, because we know that in order for places to continue to fit, all right, they have to be able to change to fit. That's the way they're sustained. All right? That's the way they don't come out of date, whatever you want to call it. In that sense, we define a culture of practice both practical in its objective and strategic in its ambitions, right? With a strong commitment from everyone to share in the future, which starts now. That is my definition of sustainability. It's not environmental, it's very pragmatic.